All right, let's hit these questions here. Our first question of the day, and it is an absolute S tier pumper juicer of a question. It comes from @Prince_Disney, the heir to the Disney throne. So I don't even know why this guy cares about training, because he's going to be so rich one day. He asks, how much would you vary volume progression in someone who trains to failure from the start of a mesocycle versus someone who begins a meso training to 3 to 4 RIR? So two different individuals here. One individual A, lifter A, starts their mesocycle training to failure and progresses somehow. And then there is lifter B, who begins the meso training to 3 to 5 RIR, and I'm assuming that their progression model is descending reps in reserve. So starting at 3 to 5 RIR, working your way down to 0 to 1 RIR. So how would you vary the volume progression between lifter A and lifter B? Failure Fred and RIR Randy.
That got my adrenaline going. I don't know if it's all the stims or like my heart rate just kept going. No, but I think like the first question we would have to ask ourselves would be, why would it be different, right? So like theoretically, and this is theoretically, I don't even necessarily agree with what I'm about to say, but theoretically, like what is the advantage of training to failure? Hopefully to try and get a similar stimulus or a really good stimulus with fewer sets than shy of failure. That's like literally the only reason. The only potential, maybe theoretical advantage is to try and get a good stimulus and less sets. So when we think of it that way, it really shouldn't be different, right? It would be the same if you needed to escalate sets, which is a whole nother question, is do we even need to do that? Do we need to progress number of sets, right? But like if you were going to compare the two, it should in theory be similar, just to a smaller scale, right? Does that make sense?
So theoretically, for the person who trains to failure, what is the volume progression for them? What is the progression model for someone who is training to failure from the start of a mesocycle? Because for someone who's using RIR, you can use descending RIRs and add 1 to 2 reps per set, and then that provides your volume progression. Are we adding sets for the person to failure?
I mean,
I don't know. That's a weird question.
I don't have an answer for that, but it's interesting that you bring that up because you do end up losing a tool of overloading progressively, right? When you take every single set to failure. So that really only leaves you with, you can add load, but then you do lose
your reps will come down.
Yeah. And then, like adding sets would if you felt like you needed to increase your volume, and I guess it depends on which definition of volume you're using, because just because sets come down, if you're counting volume by effective reps or effective volume, your effective reps and volume may not be coming down, right?
Yeah. I have a client I do this with. He doesn't like using RIR to not that he doesn't like using it. He doesn't like the 4s, the 5s, intro week stuff. So his mesocycle just starts at 1 to 2, and which I guess, he doesn't start training to failure, but he's starting at a 1 to 2 RIR, and then the next week, I just tell him to beat reps if he can and get closer to 1 than 2, and then the third week will increase load a little bit, but that's 3 weeks of the same volume, set volume. That's the same set volume for 3 weeks. And then the fourth week, he'll push to quote unquote failure. And that, if I feel the need to add volume through sets, I'll give him a back off set at the end of all those failure sets where he kind of can drop load a little bit and go a little bit further. But I think Paul makes a good point, because in my opinion, if you're training to failure so much and to true failure, you really shouldn't need to increase volume that much over the course of that time. But then, like, you have two different aspects of progressive overload that you can't use because, one, you might not be able to handle more volume because if you're truly training to failure, you might just be battered from it. You're not going to get effective reps if you do another set. It might just turn into junk volume at that point. And then, you know, we can't, if failure is where we're going, then there's no way to control that too.
That is it. I think that's a really good point that you brought up, is that if you are taking all of your sets to failure, you only have so much room for good volume or effective volume, because more quickly you are going to run into that point of diminishing returns where adding an extra set is junk volume.
Yeah.
I just think, how long is this mesocycle going to be comparatively between both protocols?
Yeah.
I feel like if you're training to failure, how much of that mesocycle is going to be decent volume, like you guys brought up? Like, eventually it's probably going to be pretty shitty towards the end. Oh, we didn't even make it to 10 minutes.
Dang it.
That's my
We'll bleep
fault.
that out.
Start all over
It's
again.
in the Bible. That's not a bad word.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, true.
That's true. That's true.
We're big Bible thumpers here at the Gifted Performance Podcast.
Absolutely. But I think, how long is this? Just because you can't really vary volume that much unless, which is often the case, the person says they're training to failure, but they're really not training to failure. That's also something to kind of take into account is often when someone says they're training to fail, like, is there somebody there catching the bar for them or catching the dumbbell because they've failed, or are they right before? Most of the time when someone says they're training to failure, they're really training to like 1 RIR because they're often training by themselves.
If that.
Yeah, if that. Because we all go through that same progression where we kind of go, oh shit, this is heavy. See, I did it again, but it's in the Bible. But, you know, we kind of think, I'm getting close to failure. This is starting to get heavy, and we stop. And even the research kind of shows this. Like, most people stop far before they've actually even gotten close to failure. So that would be my first question, is often you can probably actually vary volume a little bit because the person's really not training to failure. Someone that's truly training to failure probably won't survive 2 or 3 weeks of making any actual progress because they're just banging their head up against a wall.
For most, I would say that failure probably means like technical failure as opposed to like true concentric like failure. Like
Maybe not even that. Maybe we should call it training to high discomfort.
Yeah. I like
oh,
that.
this is scary.
I like that. Last week we talked about intent. We're creating our own word now, training to high levels of discomfort. That's the new
Yeah,
t-shirt.
like I tell people just like mechanical failure. Like, once your form goes to shit, why even bother doing another rep after that point?
So even like the most hardcore advocates of training to failure on, like, you can check them so easily, like on their leg day. Like, when you do a set of squats, are you getting pinned at the bottom on each set? You're doing 5 sets of squats to failure, and you're getting pinned at the bottom at the end of every single one of those sets. The leg press is coming crashing down on you because you train to true failure. You're getting stuck at the bottom. Like, you're doing leg extensions until you literally cannot move your quads anymore. You're not truly training to failure there. And you probably shouldn't, because that would be silly. You would break a lot of barbells, and you might get kicked out of Zoo Health Club of Oviedo. People don't forget. To the owner of Zoo Health Club of Oviedo, when you were stuck in the parking lot and your car needed a jump, I came to rescue you. I pulled out the jumper cables and I helped you. And then a few weeks later, you told me to never return to your gym again. People don't forget.
So, but to answer this guy's question, I'll tell them what I do with my own training. And for some of my clients, I do something a little different. For some of them, I do stuff that's very similar to mine. But for myself, I don't escalate sets for most body parts. And it's kind of crazy, right? Like, this question was asked generally, but I treat different body parts differently. Crazy, right? Novel concept. That not every single muscle group would be the same, or that you might treat the same with your volume. But
I don't believe you.
But so I have like, for most of my body parts, I have my intro week, right? Which is lower volume. And then after that, I go to my normal static volume that I just maintain for the block. Now, what I'll do is for periods of time, I will pick a body part or maybe two, maybe like two small body parts or one big body part. And I will escalate that volume over ranges. So like, let's say block one, the range is 8 to 10, 11 sets, a very small increase over a training week. And I see how I handle that. Handle it well. Okay, next block, 10 to 12, 13, whatever. Next block. And I incrementally do that to see if I can find a range of volume, a higher range of volume that I can maintain without getting decrements in performance. And over that process, sort of reflect back on those various blocks of training, and looking at how well my load and rep progression went. Does that make sense?
Can I get a point of clarification?
Yeah.
When you say you reflect back on the block and it went well,
Yeah.
What kind of variables are you looking at to quantify it went well?
Yeah, dude. So my load increases are fairly fixed, right? So I'm looking at like how well my rep progression went, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Dom, I think a lot of the training that you write is similar to Paul's. Do you have any kind of like differentiators between how you write your progression? And then, Jay, I'm coming to you next.
Go to Jay. My dog's going nuts.
Charlie, how do you progress? Oh, you add sets? Oh, Charlie, you insane dog. Jay, what's your progression model look like?
It probably sounds fairly similar to what Paul said, but usually I'll kind of start on the low end, and then I'm paying really close attention to how the individual sort of increases repetitions over time. So with a specific load. So I don't really like to mess with load too much unless they like completely blow through. So if I give them, say 100 pounds, and then all of a sudden they do 30 repetitions, that means it's time to increase load, because that we're getting a bit outside of what the Schoenfeld study said would be appropriate with regards to repetitions and hypertrophy. So then I might adjust load, and it really depends on the individual. Some people just tend to tolerate more volume, especially in specific body parts, and increasing volume from week to week. It's kind of a case-specific thing. I don't do well with increasing sets by volume, but that's also because I'm old, and I've already been through that. So I don't tolerate that very well. I basically have a set number of set number of sets that I'll perform per body part, and that's just over time of paying attention to progress. So I kind of have a set number, but if I get one of these young Thundercats that can just handle, they have these joints that are made out of plastic still, they can do whatever they want. Those people, I may push them a little bit week to week, especially if their performance looks something like 100 pounds, 20, 19, 16, then I go, okay, they can probably tolerate another set as opposed to increasing load, because, we all can probably agree, as you increase load, you also increase the chance of potential injury. So I would much rather increase set volume in some instances as opposed to load.
Dude,
I can dig that.
I really like one thing you said, and it reminded me of two things.
Only one. Huh? The rest was shit.
But no. That you start low, and that's something I try to get across to people, or like people that ask me advice on coaching or training. Is to start at the low end. Like, always start there, because if you just pick some random high number of sets, things don't go well. You have no idea where to go from there. Do I go up? Do I go down? But if you start low, there's only one direction you can go, right? Up.
Yeah.
And
remember when there was a semi-famous doctor whose name I will not bring up, but he said that you had to increase sets from meso to mesocycle somewhere between 10 and 20. And I think we probably all did that experiment on ourselves.
Yeah.
And probably either saw a lot of aches and pains and not a ton of progress when you're increasing
35.
every single body part.
Like,
to 35 sets.
35 sets of traps per week, baby.
I'll tell you what the problem is. Like, it worked okay for me. It didn't not work or whatever, but
it works.
I never
it
figured out. I never figured out the amount of volume I needed ever. I had no idea. I was just mindlessly going through these giant jumps in number of sets, and you don't learn anything about yourself. And that's why I say when I do pick that one or two body parts that I escalate volume on, that I use very narrow ranges, 2 or 3 sets, 2, maybe 4 over a block, maybe. And sometimes I'm like, oh, that went well. Let me try it one more time before I go up, right? So I actually have some data, because what can you base off of just 4 weeks? And that actually takes me back to, you asked me what I reflect back on. There actually is a little more. Like, I like to do estimated 1 RMs, which are really big for me. And then along with the rep counts, sometimes it's just intuitive. Like, you can just look at numbers and RIR and see how they compare over previous weeks. But and then I'll also sort of try my best to look at circumference measures, but that gets really hairy, right? Because did circumference go up because we just gained a little bit of fat? Did it go up for other reasons that we don't really talk about here on this podcast? And then did it go up, if it did go up and it was because of muscle, it probably wasn't what I was doing in just the last 2 to 4 weeks. That was the culmination and the realization of 8, 16, weeks of slowly, gradually adding small amounts of tissue. I said it, tissues.
Gross. Ugh. Dom, you got anything to add?
I like programming more frequency, so I'll keep stuff 2-3 sets for a while, but they'll just be doing it a bit more frequently, like tricep movements, bicep movements, rear delt movements, side, medial delt stuff. I like to program a bit more frequently, but I get some pushback from clients because a lot of people don't understand why we're programming the way we program, but then they start complaining that it's boring or they don't even feel like they're working out. So I've had to try to work with that. For some people, I'll do later in the meso, like week 3, week 4, maybe 1 or 2 sets to 2 to 3 RIR, and then give them a set at 1 RIR, and then just let them push a little bit harder that they want. But that was one thing that I had to start trying to do because people were just my week 1 and 2 are so low in sets, I don't even feel like I'm working out. And I'm maybe you're not training with intent.
Well, I mean, dude, I feel like that's a new client thing. But after you have clients for a while, I think they really come to appreciate intro weeks.
Yeah, for sure.
But getting over that first hurdle can be tough.
Yeah, one thing that I've dealt with clients too is they're I don't know how to combat I don't enjoy RIR training. I think I do better with failure training. But then I'll see how they claim they're training to failure, and I'm you're just doing RIR without saying you're doing RIR.
Well, and that's
just calling it something that you like better.
That's what I'm gonna do next time. Somebody hits me with that as a new client, which I haven't gotten in a really long time, to be honest. Is I'm just gonna say, you know what? Fine, fuck it. Let's not make progress for the next 4 to 8 weeks. And I'm just going to give them the training log and we're going to track it. And I'm going to be like, hey, watch this. We're going to do RIR training and we're going to watch their numbers fucking skyrocket. And be like, wow.
Paul, you'd be a great mother bird. Oh, you think you can fucking fly? You think you can fly? Well, see ya.
Kick you out of the nest. Good luck.
No, here's what you give them when they push back. I feel like I'm not doing enough. You say, okay, the next time you have a headache, how many Advil are you going to grab? They're going to be like, oh, I'm going to grab 2. You say, well, why didn't you grab 30? 30 would also do the job. 30 is so much of a cooler number than 2. All the normies, the normal people, gen pop losers, they take 2 Advil. You're a fucking hardcore bodybuilder. You take 30 of them bitches.
Lose the headache,
that's insane.
get a liver ache.
Yeah. Same thing with training. If you can do less, why not just do less for as long as possible? Howdy, Gifted Gang. We hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you've been thinking about joining the Gifted Performance team but not sure one-on-one coaching is right for you, you should give the Gifted Express a try. The Gifted Express is our automated coaching feature that provides training guidance for bodybuilders, Olympic weightlifters, powerlifters, and lifestyle clients. For only $1 a day, you can get constantly varied, always progressed training. Sign up today by clicking the link in the show notes below. Now back to today's show.